My name is Lauren Ashford. I'm 29 years old. When I was 23, my father stood at the head of a long banquet table at the Fairmont Chateau Laurier in Ottawa, tapped his fork against a crystal glass, and said in front of 74 people, "When you raise two children, you hope both of them turn out." We got lucky with one. The table laughed. My brother laughed. His fiancée laughed. I was sitting at the far end, near the service doors, the spot where the tablecloth didn't quite reach the floor, and I felt something go very quiet inside me. Not sad, just quiet. The way a room goes quiet after a window breaks. I set down my wine glass. I picked up my coat from the back of my chair, and I walked out of that rehearsal dinner without saying goodbye to anyone. That was 6 years ago. Then, 8 weeks ago, my cousin sent me a message I hadn't been expecting. 3 words: "He needs you." They didn't explain. They didn't need to. What they didn't know was that the brother they'd spent a lifetime calling the successful one had spent the last 2 years losing everything: his firm, his fiancée, his apartment, and that I was apparently the only person left who hadn't either abandoned him or looked the other way. This is what happened when the golden child fell apart and the daughter they never counted showed up anyway. Let me take you back. The Ashford family, 44 Birchwood Crescent, Kanata, Ontario. Detached 2-story, double driveway. The kind of neighborhood where people put Christmas wreaths on their doors in November and leave them until February. My father, a federal government manager with the Department of Finance for 31 years. My mother, a school board administrator. 2 kids. From the outside, a family that sends out a card every December with a photo of everyone in matching colors. From the inside, a house with a ranking system that nobody ever acknowledged out loud, but everyone understood perfectly. My brother Colin was born in 1991. I came in 1994, 3 years apart and an entirely different standard of expectation. Colin graduated from Lisgar Collegiate with honors. I graduated with an 81 average and a part-time job at a Shoppers Drug Mart. I'd gotten myself because I needed money for things my parents didn't think to ask about. Colin got accepted to Queen's Commerce on his first round. I applied to Carleton for journalism, which my mother described at a family dinner in front of my aunt as a program for people who couldn't get into something with a real career path. Colin went straight to articling at a Bay Street firm after his MBA. I spent 2 years in a newsroom making $36,000, which my father once referred to as a stepping stone, hopefully. But the worst part was never the achievements. It was the small things, the Sunday roast dinners, the way my father would finish Colin's sentences and trail off mid-sentence when I spoke, the way my mother would look at me when I mentioned something I was proud of, a story I'd written, a raise I'd gotten, with an expression that was almost interested. Almost. I started writing things down the year I turned 16. I needed somewhere to put it. How many times my father asked Colin a question at dinner versus me? 9 to 2, average over 4 months. How many times my mother said, "That's great, sweetheart," to Colin in a single week, versus to me, 7 to 0. I wrote it in a blue coil notebook I kept in my desk drawer under some old school notes. Numbers felt cleaner than feelings. Numbers didn't ask you to explain yourself. The thing that broke everything open happened on a Saturday in October 2017. Colin's rehearsal dinner, the night before his wedding to a woman named Harriet, whose family owned 2 car dealerships in Barrie and a cottage on Lake Simcoe. The wedding itself was at a church in the Glebe. The rehearsal dinner was at the Fairmont. My parents had contributed significantly to the cost. I knew because my mother had mentioned it 3 times in my presence, each time in the tone of someone announcing a personal sacrifice. I had driven from Toronto, where I'd been working for 18 months as a junior editor at a mid-sized media company. 4.5 hours on the 401, alone, because I hadn't been offered a ride with anyone. I'd bought a dress from a Zara sale rack for $62. I'd done my own hair in the bathroom of the rest stop outside Kingston. My seat at the rehearsal dinner was at the far end of the table, between a colleague of my father's, who spent the evening looking at his phone, and an elderly family friend who got my name wrong twice and didn't seem troubled by it. I'd introduced myself twice. The second time, I just let it go. My father stood up around 9 o'clock. He had the kind of presence that makes a room shift. Tall, measured, the sort of man who speaks slowly because he's learned that people lean in when he makes them wait. He picked up his wine glass, looked at Colin the way I'd never once seen him look at me, and started talking. 33 years ago, he said, "Your mother and I decided to build something. We had hopes. We had a vision for what a family could look like. And then Colin arrived, and everything we'd imagined started becoming real. Applause. My mother pressed her fingers to the corner of her eye. Tomorrow, I'm watching my son marry the right person, and I can say honestly, when you raise 2 children, you hope both of them turn out. We got lucky with one. Laughter. Real laughter. 74 people. My father smiled the way he smiled when he'd landed something well. My mother covered her mouth, delighted. Colin shook his head at the head of the table, the modest, gracious gesture of someone being publicly celebrated. I was at the end of the table. I was the other one. The applause lasted 9 seconds. I counted because I needed something to hold on to. I didn't cry. I didn't make a scene. I sat still for exactly 3 minutes, and then I got up, got my coat, and left. I took the elevator down to the lobby, walked through the revolving door onto Wellington Street, stood on the sidewalk in October cold for a moment, and then walked to the parkade where I'd left my car. My mother came out through the hotel doors while I was still 2 blocks away from the entrance. I heard her heels on the pavement before I heard her voice. Lauren, wait. I stopped. I turned around. She was walking quickly, her expression the one she used when I created a logistical problem she now had to solve. Not worry. Inconvenience. Where are you going? Home. You can't leave. It's Colin's rehearsal dinner. Dad just told 74 people I was the child they didn't get lucky with. She exhaled through her nose, short and sharp. It was a toast. He was being warm about Colin. He said they got lucky with one of you. He said it into a microphone, Mum. You're being sensitive. This is not the time. It's never the time. She crossed her arms and glanced back toward the hotel. Your brother is getting married tomorrow. Tonight is not about you. That sentence. Tonight is not about you. Said without cruelty. Just as a fact. Like something everyone already knew. That's exactly what I mean, I said. She looked at me for a moment, then looked at her watch and said, Are you coming back inside or not? No. Fine. Don't make this something it isn't. She turned and walked back toward the hotel entrance. She didn't look back. I walked to my car. I sat in the parkade on Metcalf Street and cried for 20 minutes. The parkade cost $18 for the evening, and I remember that number because the ticket was in my hand and I needed something real to hold on to. I drove back to Toronto that night. 4.5 hours, 2 Tim Hortons coffees, 0 messages from anyone at that dinner. I checked my phone 11 times between Ottawa and the 400. I stopped checking somewhere around Barrie. I blocked my parents' numbers when I got home. Then I blocked Colin's. Then I sat at my kitchen table and did the rest methodically over 2 hours. The family group chat, the Facebook connection, the shared Google Photos album my mother had set up at Christmas 3 years ago. I removed every thread. I changed my number 10 days later. I kept 2 people. My cousin Denise, who had texted me at 9:23 that night, "That was horrible, are you okay?" And my best friend from university, Ren. That was my family now. 2 people who had actually shown up. It was enough. The year after the rehearsal dinner, it was enough. The year after the rehearsal dinner, I worked. Toronto, then a better opportunity. In early 2019, I accepted a content director role at a tech company in Vancouver. I packed a rental van in March. I drove alone across the country, 5 days, the Trans-Canada. I arrived in Vancouver in the rain, which I later learned was not unusual, and I didn't mind it. My first apartment was a 1-bedroom in Mount Pleasant, $1,780 a month. I painted the bedroom a deep navy blue the first weekend I was there, by myself, because I'd always wanted a room that color and there was no one to negotiate with. I started seeing a therapist that fall. Dr. Sintz. Say, Wednesday mornings, covered partially under my benefits plan, $45 out of pocket per session. First appointment, she asked me what I was hoping to get from the work. I sat with the question for a while. I want to stop waiting for them to acknowledge what they did, I said. What would acknowledgement give you? I didn't have an answer right away. But that was the beginning. I built a life in Vancouver that had no gaps in it shaped like them. Promotions came. Content director by 2020. Senior director by 2020. Senior director by 2020. Salary at $91,000. Paid off my OSAP in full on a Friday afternoon in March 2022. I made a cup of tea and stood in my kitchen and looked at the confirmation screen on my laptop for a long time. I cried. Not because I was sad, because I had done it without anyone's help, and it was entirely mine. I made real friends. My neighbor Petra, who knocked on my door in 2010 to ask if I wanted to go for a walk, because she'd seen me sitting on the building steps alone, and thought I looked like I could use some air. My coworker Finn, who always saved me a seat in the big team meetings because he noticed I always ended up near the back. My friend from my hiking group, Amara, who never once asked why I didn't go back east for Thanksgiving, and never made me feel like the reason mattered. These people became my structure, my chosen ground. I dated. Nothing that lasted long, for a while. Then, in 2023, someone named Callum, 31, a high school geography teacher in North Vancouver, who noticed things most people didn't. One evening, he said, "You ask permission before you share an opinion. Did you know that?" I blinked. I hadn't noticed. Every time you're about to disagree with me, you say sorry first. I took that to Dr. Osei. We spent 3 sessions on it. Callum and I ended things in early 2024, gently, for timing reasons. But he'd left something behind. An awareness. I was still finding places inside me where the dinner table had gotten through the walls. By the start of 2025, I felt like I'd closed most of it. I had good work, good people. My Navy wall, my Wednesday appointments, my Saturday hikes. I'd gone whole weeks without thinking about any of them. I thought I was done. Then on a Tuesday evening in February 2025 at around 6:40 p.m., while I was making dinner, pasta, half a glass of wine, a podcast about urban planning I'd been meaning to finish since November. My phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. 6113 area code, Ottawa. I almost didn't open it. 3 words, "He needs you." I put the phone face down on the counter. I finished making dinner. I sat at my table and ate the whole thing, washed the pot, dried it, put it away. Then I picked up the phone and typed, "Who is this?" The response came in 30 seconds. "It's Denise. I'm sorry. It's Colin Lauren. It's bad." I called her immediately. Colin's wedding to Harriet had lasted 4 years. They'd separated in the spring of 2023, irreconcilable differences. But Denise hesitated when she said it. I asked her directly. She exhaled. Colin had been struggling. Financially, she said first, and then more carefully, personally. The architecture firm he co-founded in 2021 had run into serious trouble. A commercial project had gone badly over budget. There was a dispute with the contractor, and by late 2023, 2 of the founding partners had quietly bought out his share. He'd been effectively pushed out. He hadn't told anyone. He'd kept paying his downtown Toronto condo fees until he couldn't, and by the fall of 2024, he'd surrendered the unit and was renting a basement apartment in Scarborough. "Does he have work?" I asked. "Some. Contract stuff. Nothing steady." "Lauren, I saw him in January, and he looked." She stopped. "He's not okay. He's not eating. He barely leaves. The apartment is dark, like he's keeping the blinds down all the time. I don't think he's been to the grocery store in weeks. And your aunt and uncle? They've been by a few times. He lets them in. But they're..." She paused. "They keep telling people he's between projects, evaluating new opportunities. Your mom told someone at her book club he's doing independent consulting." I felt my jaw tighten. Managing the story. Of course. The Ashfords of Birchwood Crescent with the double driveway and the Christmas wreath, a son who had failed, didn't fit the picture. So they'd edit the picture. "Why are you calling me?" I said. "He hasn't spoken to me in 6 years. I left. I blocked everyone." Denise was quiet for a moment. "He asks about you," she said. "When I see him, not all the time, but he wonders. He thinks you left because of him. Like you couldn't stand to be around him after the wedding." "I left because of what happened at the rehearsal dinner." "What my father said." "I know that. But does Colin?" Silence. "He was drinking that night," she said carefully. "He says he barely remembers the toasts." "And your parents told him?" "Lauren, they told him you needed space, that you'd been going through a hard time and you pulled away because of that it was your decision." I set down my wine glass. "They told him I needed space. Yes. They told him I chose this. Yes." A pause. "And Lauren, he did try to reach you. About a month after the wedding. He called your old number. Your mom told me that he tried from their house once, when he'd forgotten his phone, and she and your dad could see he'd been trying to contact you, and she stopped." "They what?" "They deleted your contact from his phone. They said they didn't want him going into his wedding week upset if you didn't pick up." I put the phone against my chest and stood in my kitchen in Vancouver and breathed for a while. He had tried. He had actually tried to reach me. And they had stood there and removed the possibility, and then let 6 years of silence grow over it, like the silence had always been mine. "Okay," I said when I brought the phone back up. "Tell me his address." I called Dr. Osei's emergency line that night. We talked for 35 minutes. She asked me, at the end, the question she always asked when I was at a turning point. "What do you owe them?" "Nothing," I said. "Then what is this?" I thought about it for a long time. I think this is about whether I can go back into that and still know who I am when I come out. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. 3 days later, I called my mother. The number I had for her was 6 years old. She answered on the second ring. Her voice was exactly as I remembered, measured, careful, a fraction clipped. "Lauren, not a question." "I know about Colin," I said. "I want to know what's actually happening." What followed was 18 minutes of the managed version. She used phrases like going through an adjustment period and processing some professional setbacks. I interrupted twice. The second time I said, "Mom, is he leaving the apartment?" Silence. "We don't think so. Not regularly." "Has anyone suggested that he speak to someone?" A longer silence. "Your father thinks he just needs time to reset. Colin's always been resilient." I pressed my eyes shut. Colin is not resilient right now. Colin is sitting alone in a dark apartment in Scarborough, and you've been telling people he's consulting. That's not supporting him. That's protecting yourselves. Her voice tightened. "You don't have the full picture." "I have enough of it. Tell me something." I kept my voice even. "Did you tell Colin that I chose not to be in contact? That I was the one who pulled away?" Silence. "Mum, we told him you needed space. That's not what happened. We simplified. You made my brother believe his sister had written him off. For 6 years, while he was struggling, you let him think I didn't care. And when he tried to call me, you deleted my number from his phone." I let that sit. "I'm flying to Toronto. I'm going to see him. And I need you and Dad to be ready to cover the cost of whatever support he agrees to. That's not a request. You don't get to manage what happens next. You managed enough." My mother was quiet for a long moment. Then, quietly, "We're his parents." "I know," I said. "And you told 74 people at a rehearsal dinner that God got lucky with one of your children, and then you told my brother the silence was my fault. So right now, that credential doesn't carry much weight. I'll text you with details. I booked a flight for that Saturday. Vancouver to Toronto, 7:15 a.m., WestJet, $1,318 round trip. I texted Denise, "I'm coming." She sent back a single heart. I told Petra and Finn and Amara where I was going in broad strokes. Petra said, "Be careful with yourself in there." Finn said, "Text me when you land." Amara said, "You don't owe them anything, but I think you already know what you're going to do." I landed at Pearson at 1:30 in the afternoon. I rented a car. I drove to my parents' house in Canada first because I needed to look at them before I looked at him. I needed to know I could walk into that house and still be the person who'd left Vancouver that morning. 44 Birchwood Crescent. The driveway had been repaved. The shutters were new gray. The Christmas wreath was still up in February, dried out and tilting slightly to one side. The house that had spent 25 years trying to look like nothing complicated lived inside it. My mother opened the door before I reached the step. She'd seen me from the window. She looked older, smaller somehow. She reached toward me and I stepped to the side and walked past her into the front hall. My father was in the living room in the leather recliner that had been in that same position since I was 12. He stood when I came in, tall, grayer now, the same expression he'd always had, composed, a little inconvenienced by the emotional nature of things. "Lauren," he said. "Hi, Dad." I sat on the couch. I kept my coat on. I made them tell me everything, the real version. My father delivered it like a briefing. Sequence. Outcome. The firm had started showing cracks in 2022. Colin had been over-leveraged. The project failure had cost him more than just the partnership. He borrowed against the condo. By mid-2024, it was gone. He'd told my parents in November, and their word was managed the information. They'd lent him money to cover the rent on the Scarborough apartment. My father had made some calls to former colleagues about contract opportunities. Neither of them had suggested he speak to anyone professionally. You've known for over a year, I said. We were trying to. You were trying to keep the story clean. You told people he was consulting. You managed the optics. I looked at them both. I need to tell you something, and I need you to actually hear it, not defend it. They were quiet. At the rehearsal dinner. Do you remember what you said? I looked at my father. He looked at the floor. You told 74 people that you got lucky with one of your children. I was sitting at the end of the table, and I heard my father announce to a room full of people that I was the one they hadn't gotten lucky with. And then I left, and you told Colin that was my choice. You let him believe for 6 years that his sister didn't care about him, and while he was losing everything, he was carrying that too. My voice didn't shake. I've been over this enough times in Wednesday morning sessions that the words had worn smooth. I'm not here for an apology, I said. I'm not here for an apology, I said. I'm not here because I've forgiven you. I'm here for Colin, and when he's stable and getting proper support, I'll make my own decisions about what comes next. But right now, today, you both need to understand what you actually did, not the version you've been telling yourselves. I stood. I'm going to see him now. I left them sitting in that living room with the family photos arranged on the wall. Colin's convocation, Colin's firm announcement in the National Post, Colin and Harriet at their wedding. And I drove 45 minutes east to Scarborough. The building was a low rise on a quiet street near Kingston Road. No buzzer system, just a door code Denise had texted me. I knocked on the door of Unit 3. A long pause. Then footsteps. The door opened 3 inches, chain still on. One eye. A sliver of face. I almost didn't recognize him. Colin had always been the kind of person who owned a good coat and kept his shoes polished and returned texts within a reasonable window. What I saw through that gap was something I didn't immediately have a word for. Hollowed. Like someone had taken my brother and removed the essential thing. You look different, he said. His voice was rough, unused. Let me in. The chain slid off. The apartment had probably been fine when he moved in. You could see it if you looked. Clean lines. Decent light from the window. But the blind was drawn and what came in was dim and flat. Fast food bags on the counter, old enough that the smell was present, dishes in the sink. His coat on the floor near the door, instead of hung up. He was wearing a sweatshirt I recognized from university, worn thin at the elbows. He was thin in the way that happens when you forget to feed yourself. His face was unshaved past the point of intention. I sat down on the floor. Not the couch. The floor. Back against the wall. He stood for a moment and then slid down the wall across from me. Mom called you, he said. Denise texted me first. Then I called Mom. He made a short sound that might have been a laugh. So you're here because they finally couldn't hide it anymore. I'm here because Denise reached out and I chose to come. Not because of them. He looked at me for a moment. Then at the floor, I thought you hated me after the wedding. I thought the toast. I knew it was bad, but I didn't realize. He rubbed his face. I tried to call you, like a month later. I know, your number was disconnected. I changed it, but not before you tried. You called before I changed it, Colin. They'd already taken my number out of your phone. You couldn't have reached me, even if the number had still worked. He stared at me. They deleted your contact? Yes. The expression that moved across his face was something I'd never seen on him before. Not his adult face. Not the composed, put-together version. Something younger. Something that had been waiting under all of it for a long time. They deleted your number. Yes. He put his head back against the wall. And you thought I didn't try. And you thought I didn't care. We sat with that for a while. It took up the room between us like furniture we'd have to learn to move around. After a while, he said, quietly, without looking at me, Do you know what it's like to be the one they're proud of? No. Tell me. He exhaled slowly. It's like every single thing you do has to justify the investment they made in it. Not for you, for them. Every promotion was their proof. Every good case I won, every deal, it went straight into who they were. And when the firm went sideways, he stopped. It wasn't just that I'd failed, it was that I'd failed publicly. In a way, they couldn't spin. And I watched them start spinning it anyway, and I let them. Because I didn't know how to be in that family any other way. I thought about the blue notebook, the tally marks. We'd both been keeping track, just in different languages. I was angry at you, I said. After the rehearsal dinner, for not saying anything. for going along with it. I need you to know that because I'm not going to pretend otherwise." He nodded. "But I also understand now that you grew up in the same house I did. You had a different kind of pressure. It cost you things I didn't see." He looked at me then. Really looked. "I'm sorry," he said, "for not saying anything that night, for letting them treat you the way they did for so long. I knew it was wrong and he stopped. I was the easier thing to be. I didn't rush to say it was okay. It wasn't entirely okay. I let his sorry be there without covering it over. "I've been looking at some options," I said. "There's a program at a center in Toronto, outpatient, 3 days a week. They have a therapist and a support coordinator. It's covered under OHH with a referral, and the supplemental parts are covered under a standard benefits plan if you have one. If you don't, the gap is manageable and mom and dad are going to cover it. That's already decided." I looked at him steadily. "But I need to know you're willing to actually go. Not for them. Not to fix the family image. For yourself. Because you are worth putting back together. I believe that. I need to know if you do." He was quiet for a long time. Then, "I don't know how to start." "You don't have to know how. You just have to say yes." He nodded once. Small, like it cost him something. I made calls that afternoon. His GP agreed to a same-week referral. The intake coordinator at the center had an opening Thursday. I drove Colin to my parents' house to pick up some things he'd left there. Clothes, his health card, some documents. I stood in the front hall while he went upstairs. My parents hovered in the kitchen doorway. My mother kept reaching toward him. My father stood with his hands in his pockets and looked at the wall. When Colin came back downstairs with his bag, my father started to say something. Colin looked at him and said, "Not today, Dad." My father, for maybe the first time in his life, stopped. I booked Colin a room at a hotel near the Eaton Center that night, reasonable, clean, 15 minutes from the center. We ordered room service, soup, bread, something simple. He talked for 2 hours. I listened. I didn't fix. I just stayed. Around midnight he said, "I still can't believe you came." I said, "I almost didn't." He nodded slowly. "I know. That's why it means what it means." Thursday morning, I drove him to his first appointment. We sat in the car outside for a few minutes before he went in. "You don't have to wait," he said. "I know." He looked at the building. "Are we going to be okay? You and me?" I thought about it the way Dr. Osei had taught me. Honestly, not hopefully. I think we can build something real. Not the relationship we should have had. Something honest, from where we actually are. "That's better anyway," he said. He got out. He turned once at the door and raised his hand. I raised mine back. He went inside. That was 8 weeks ago. My life in Vancouver is exactly as I left it. The Navy Wall, the Saturday hikes with Amara, Petra's Sunday dinners, Finn's terrible movie recommendations, Wednesday mornings with Dr. Osei, who asked me 2 weeks ago, "What did you learn about yourself in all of this?" I sat with it for a long time before I answered. What I learned was that I could walk back into the thing that had shaped me, the house, the hallway, the living room with the chair angled toward the television, the photo wall that had never once included me. And I could speak clearly, leave when I chose, and still recognize myself when I got back to my rental car. I could be inside all of it and not lose the ground I'd built. Colin calls me on Wednesdays now. We talk for 40 minutes, sometimes longer. The conversations are still finding their footing, still a little careful. But they're ours. Not performed. Not filtered to anyone else's version of who we're supposed to be. Just two people who came from the same house, different damage, trying to know each other honestly for the first time. He called last week and said, "I've been thinking about what it meant that you showed up. I think it meant you decided I was worth it before I'd given you any reason to." I said, "I decided we were both casualties of the same thing. Different positions, same damage." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I want to learn how to actually be your brother." I said, "I'd like that. Let's take it slow." My parents have sent 2 emails since February. Short, asking for updates. I've given them the minimum. He's doing well. The program is good. My father sent 1 message on his own that said, "We'd like to talk when you're ready." I haven't responded, not because I don't know what I want to say, but because I haven't finished deciding what I want the rest of that relationship to be. That's not avoidance. It's a choice I'm making carefully on my own timeline, the same way I've made every real choice in my adult life. I know people will ask themselves, ask me. Ask in the comments whether going back meant forgiving them, whether it meant saying what they did was acceptable, whether I undid 6 years of distance by walking back through that door. It didn't mean any of those things. I went back because my brother was drowning in the current our parents had built, and I was the only one willing to throw something real. Not a managed narrative, not a managed narrative, not a maintained appearance, something true. And then I drove back to Vancouver, to my apartment, to my Navy wall, to the life I'd built entirely on my own, while they were busy explaining to their book clubs and their colleagues why I wasn't there. My name is Lauren Ashford. I'm 29 years old. I spent 6 years being the one who didn't count, the wrong end of every dinner table, the name mentioned once where his was mentioned 9 times. I was the child they hadn't gotten lucky with. But I want you to know, if you're sitting at that table right now, the one near the service doors, the one where the tablecloth doesn't reach the floor, their blind spot is not your ceiling. You can walk out of that rehearsal dinner, drive 4.5 hours home, build an entire life, and come back 6 years later as the only one who actually knows what to do. Leave the table they set for you, build your own, and never confuse their limited vision for the truth about what you are. I used to think that walking away was the end of something. Now I understand it was the beginning of everything that actually mattered. When I left that parkade on Metcalf Street 6 years ago, I wasn't running. I was finally moving in a direction that was mine. Every choice I made after that night, the apartment in Vancouver, the Navy wall I painted myself, the Wednesday mornings with Dr. O.C., the friendships I built slowly and honestly, those weren't acts of escape. They were acts of building. And what I built held. Not because I was exceptional, but because I was deliberate, because I chose, over and over again, to be honest about what had happened to me instead of finding a softer word for it. That's something I'd come to believe quietly. The way you understand your own story determines what you do next with it. I could have told myself the rehearsal dinner was just a bad joke, that my parents were flawed but well-meaning, that I was oversensitive the way my mother said. A part of me wanted to believe that for years, because the alternative, that the people who raised me had ranked me and found me lacking, and had built a family around that conclusion, was harder to sit with. But the harder truth was the one that actually set me free. When I stopped softening it, I could finally see it clearly enough to move away from it, and then Colin. I think about the version of me who almost didn't open that text, who left the phone face down and didn't pick it back up. That version of me would have been understandable. She would have been justified. But she would have also missed something. The chance to find out that my brother was never the enemy I'd cast him as, that he'd been shaped and pressured and hollowed out by the same house I was, just from a different angle. His cage looked nicer from the outside. That didn't make it less of a cage. Going back didn't mean I forgave everything. It meant I was willing to look at the full picture, including the parts that complicated my own narrative. That took something. It took the kind of clear-eyed honesty that I'd had to learn the hard way over years in a therapist's office on Wednesday mornings in a city 3,000 kilometers from where I grew up. Real understanding. The kind that actually changes how you act. Doesn't come from somewhere comfortable. It comes from being willing to stay in the room with a difficult thing long enough to actually see it. What I found when I sat down on Colin's floor in that dim apartment in Scarborough wasn't a golden child who'd gotten what he deserved. I found a person who had never been taught to fail, and so had no idea what to do when he did. My parents had built him to perform. When the performance collapsed, there was nothing underneath it, no practice falling, no muscle memory for getting back up. I had learned all of that in the years they hadn't been watching. That was the unexpected gift inside the wound. I knew how to rebuild something from the ground floor because I'd already done it. I didn't go back to prove anything to them. I went because Colin was worth something real, and I had something real to offer. That was enough. It still is. If there's anything I'd want someone in a similar situation to carry with them, it's this. The clarity to see things as they actually are. The courage to act on what you see even when it's inconvenient. And the persistence to keep building the life you deserve long after the people who doubted you have stopped watching. Not for them. For the version of yourself who's still waiting at the wrong end of the table, wondering if it gets better. It does. But you have to be the one who decides to leave.